Have you ever tried to use Blender to make a 3D model and found that it was way too hard? Maybe the interface was a bit intimidating with all of the buttons. Maybe the need to learn a million hotkeys made things too confusing? Well, today I'm going to show you that you can create a realistic 3D render with only having learned a few of the buttons and a couple of hotkeys. We're going to model a wine glass 3 different ways. Just because it's a nice simple model, we'll take it easy and only really learn what you need to learn to get some results. Now, first things first, when you load up Blender for the first time, your user interface might look a little bit different than mine. I've got a theme set on here that I prefer than the default, and it's really easy to fix that if you want to change yours to look like mine, or you can change it however you like. We'll just go into File, and then User Preferences, and in the Themes tab here, you can choose under the Presets option here, and just left click on there, and choose Elysian, which is the one that I'm using. There's a whole bunch of alternatives, so you're welcome to click on all of them and see which one you like more. It's not going to change the layout of anything, just the colours. And yeah, I prefer Elysian. And then we'll go to System also, and I've just enabled this region overlap, and that just enables the tool panels, the tool shelves on either side of the window to come in without resizing the whole window. I'll show you a little bit of that a bit later on probably. So the first wine glass we're going to make is going to be starting off with the default cube, because that's how everyone's Blender experience starts. What we'll do is we will shrink it down and extrude out and smooth it out, and it will look really cool. So we'll start doing that now. First, probably first couple of hotkeys I'll give you. If you've got a 3-button mouse, which most people should do, you just middle click to rotate your view around in the perspective, like this. I'm just holding down the middle mouse button. And you can see over here, if I press on my mouse or press a button on my keyboard, that will show up over here. So if you're not too sure what I'm pressing at a specific point in time, you can just pause and you'll see what's happening there. So we're middle mousing around, and we can see the cube from all different angles. But in order to model something a bit more accurately and have a bit more control of what's going on, it helps to have a specific viewpoint that you're coming from. So for now, we're going to start with the front, which is the number 1 key on your numpad. Alternatively, you can click View and choose the front just here. And I'll also hit the 5 key on my numpad just to turn off perspective view, so that it's not like we're looking through an eye, but it's more like we're looking just straight on at a cube. And you can see here that it's the front ortho now. So if we scroll in with our mouse wheel, that will zoom things in a bit for us so we can see what we're working on. Then I will tab, and that will change us into edit mode, which you'll see has changed down here. So object mode was previous, and then now we're in edit mode. Also make sure your mouse cursor is in the 3D viewport when you're pressing tab, otherwise it won't work. So now if I just quickly rotate around, you'll see that we're in edit mode, and we can actually see how everything's turned orange. You can see the vertices and the edges now, and we can start modeling. So I hit Z to go into wireframe view, as you can now see through the whole cube. And we will press B to box select, and we're just going to box select the top and click on this left arrow here to move it down. This is a move arrow. It's called a widget, and if I press Control and hold it down, you'll see that it snaps to each different grid line. So I'm just going to make it nice and small. I'll make it too big, and then I'll grab the bottom with the box select again. I'll also make sure you can press A to deselect everything. So I'll press A, and that has deselected. If there's nothing selected, when you press A, it will select everything. So B to select, and then same again, holding Control and just moving that up. Now we're going to start extruding. So I want to extrude from the face that makes the top of this. It's now a cuboid. I'll press A to deselect, B to select again there, and then E to extrude. I'm going to right click to cancel the initial movement that comes with an extrusion, and then I'm going to hit S to scale, and I'm just going to move things down, and you can see the two vertices coming together in the middle. That's just the new corners of the face on the top of the cuboid. That's going to start becoming the stem of the glass. So I'll move it up a little bit, and then hit E again, and I'm just going to move this one up because it goes straight up in the Z direction anyway, and left click to confirm that. Now I'm going to hold shift and middle click to pan my view up, and then once again E to extrude, move it up a little bit, S to scale, E to extrude, move it up a little bit, and we're just going to form a sort of a glass shape for like a wine glass, and we'll go all the way up here, and we've just formed a very basic outline of what the shape of a wine glass looks like. Might scale down a little bit at the top, and then to create the actual wall of the glass, because right now we're sort of looking at, if we look at it in a 3D view, we've just got a solid object, which isn't what a normal wine glass looks like. So we will extrude, right click to cancel that transform, S to scale in a little bit, and then E to extrude again, but this time we're going to move down. S to scale, just to sort of match the, keep the size along here fairly consistent. E once again to extrude, and S to scale, and just bring that down, and that will probably do for now. What we want to do now is make things nice and round, so we'll smooth them out, and what we'll do is we'll add a subsurface modifier. So if we click over here on this wrench icon, this brings us to modifiers, and then we can click add modifier, and then just over here under generate we'll click subdivision surface. I'm going to tick both of these up by 2, so my render, because your render is going to have more detail than probably your viewport. When you're rendering, it's your computer calculating things, not in real time. So right now I can see a fairly smooth version of my wine glass without it being super complicated. It's not going to be too big of an issue right now if you've got a fairly decent computer, but when you start having lots of objects in your scene, you don't want to have the view subdivisions up too high. What we will do, just to finish off this glass, we'll do a couple of edge loop cuts. They're quite useful for adding in detail or cutting in detail to a model, and the way to do that is just to hit Ctrl R, move your mouse over to sort of where you want it to happen. If you can sort of see an edge, or if you know the edge that you want to cut along, then move it there. I've just moved mine up to along the top of the glass here, because I want to add a bit of thickness to the rim, because right now it's looking thin and a bit weird. So if I add that there, and just right click to cancel the transform that comes with that, we'll see that it's added just a couple of extra polygons there, so a little bit of extra detail. And then we'll add another loop cut on the base here. So Control R, and I'm going to left click to confirm, and then just move the mouse down a little bit and left click to confirm there. So that's done what we call reinforcing the bottom. So that's made this edge along the bottom a lot sharper than what it was. There are other techniques to cause that effect, but the easiest way that's sort of interchangeable between all software packages is to just add an extra edge loop there. And we'll do an extra couple of edge loops in the stem of the glass as well. So we'll hit Control R, move a mouse to where I want it to be, and I'm actually going to hit the scroll wheel or roll it up just twice, and then left click and right click to cancel the transform. So now I've got a fairly good looking wine glass, at least shape-wise. I'll tab back into object mode, and I'll set the shading to smooth. So we've got rid of that faceted look because we don't need that anymore because we're not really modeling on this one. And we will start adding a material to this. So the materials we're going to be using will work in Blender Cycles. It's nice and easy to switch to that. Blender Cycles render here. Change from Blender render to Cycles render. And it's just a different rendering engine. Most computers, if your computer crashes when you're rendering, then you might have to use Blender render and use some different material settings, but for now we'll just stick with Cycles render. So over here with the wine glass selected, and selecting objects is with the right mouse button as well. It's not with the left mouse button as you might expect. When you left mouse you'll move this funny little cursor around, which we're not going to use in this episode, but it is a useful tool to have. So yeah, with the wine glass selected, we'll move to materials. On surface here, there's a button that says use nodes. We'll click on that. We're not going to go into the nodes today, because they can be a bit overwhelming if you've never seen something like that before, but they are quite powerful. But we've got some defaults to work with here. So if we click on diffuse BSDF and just move the mouse down to glass BSDF, that's a fairly decent glass shader, and it will give you a pretty good result as far as approximating a glass material. So we'll just hit Shift Z to go into a rendered viewport, and you can see we've got a fairly nice looking wine glass material on our wine glass. What we want to do now is add a bit of a background and just fix up the lighting a little bit. So we'll come out of that rendered view with a Shift Z again, and I'm just going to go to the front view. Actually, we'll go to the top view, and we'll actually make use of that 3D cursor now. So now that I've moved it over here, if I want to create a new object of any type, that will be created where this 3D cursor is. So what I want to do is hit Shift C. No, I don't. I want to hit... Yes, I do. Shift C. It's centered my 3D cursor, which is very helpful. So the anything I create now will be created in the center of the world. And then Shift A, and we'll choose Mesh, and then Plane. So Shift A is your Add menu. It's also down here if you want to use it. Just tab into Edit mode, scale this up. And then we'll edit it a little bit. So we'll come into side view. We'll scale it up quite a lot. Just S to scale. So we've got a nice big area to render in. And this is just going to create a little studio background for us. A to deselect, B to box select. Make sure you've got both of these. If you haven't, Shift and then right click to grab that other vertice. And then 3 to go back to side view, E to extrude, and then we're going to create another loop cut, and we'll just bring it back down here. So we've got an extra line reinforcing that. And we'll add in a subdivision surface modifier, crank these up as well, and we've got a nice little background, and we also want to tab into object mode and set shading to smooth. So now we want to move our camera, so we'll select the camera, move to the top view. I'm going to rotate it whilst holding control, so press R to rotate and then hold down control, and we're going to rotate it roughly to there, and that will give us a fairly good view. Just left click on the red arrow to bring it across, hit 0 to look through the lens of the camera. If we press G now with the camera selected, we can move the camera around. And then if I want to zoom out a little bit, which I do, I'm going to press G, and then without left clicking or right clicking, I'm going to press Z and then Z. And then I'm going to... So by pressing Z twice, it's moving me along the normal now. And I want to make sure I left click to confirm that. I'm going to press G and then X just to make sure that's centered off. And I do want to scale up this as well. So I'll tab into edit mode, A to select all, and then just scale it up a bit more just so that it completely covers the background of my view. Now if I press Shift Z, you can see I've got my wine glass and I've got something to cast a shadow on, which is nice. It appears, yeah, there's a bit of a difference in the location there, so I'm just going to move this back up to the floor. So now the shadows is actually on the wine glass. And then lastly we will actually select the lamp here. This is just a simple lamp. It just casts a small amount of light in all directions. I'm going to change it to a sun, which creates, more light initially, and it also can give us a bit of a direction. The shadow hasn't seemed to change direction because it's sort of the sun is already pointing in that direction. We'll change the size here to 0.5. This is sort of helps to soften those shadows. If you want the harder shadows, turn it down a little bit, maybe 0.3. Yeah, I'm happy with that for now. And then here again, we'll click the Use Nodes button. And here we can now change the strength. So I'm going to change it to probably 3 as well. So that's giving me a bit more brightness in the world. You can see things a bit clearer, but it's not too overblown. And lastly, I'm going to change the color here. Just left clicking on the color. It gives you a disk to choose color from. And I'm just going to turn it a little bit yellowy orange. About there. And that just gives it, a bit of flavor to the scene. So next we're going to actually model a couple more wine glasses. We'll start with, we'll press Shift Z to go back out of there. And what we'll actually start by doing is moving to a different layer. So the default layer settings in Blender are just these little boxes here. These objects here, they belong to this first layer because when any of them are selected, you see the little orange dot there. If I've got nothing selected, there's still an orange dot, so that just means that we're working in the active layer, I think. But if we left click here, you see it's not bright anymore. And we can now start working on something separately without affecting the rest of the scene or without the rest of the scene getting in our way, which is helpful. We'll just Shift C to send that cursor back to the center. And then we'll Shift A to add in a cylinder. So it actually makes more sense to start with a cylinder than it would with a cube, because glasses in general are, a wine glass at least, are cylindrical. So really it does make sense to start from a similar shape that we can then mold however we want. I will start by reducing the number of vertices because there's quite a lot. We'll just change it to 16 just to reduce it by half so you can see how it's gotten a bit less dense there. We'll zoom in a bit. Radius we will leave, and depth we will actually increase. It's to about 4. We'll change that in there to 4. We'll turn off the cap fill here, cap fill type, change that to nothing, and we won't worry about anything else. So only a couple of buttons to click there. So we'll go into the front view again, and we will tab into edit mode, and then we want to move the object up so that the bottom of it sits on the x-axis, or the xy axis. And if I do, again, click on that, left click, on the blue arrow of the move widget and hold down Control whilst I'm moving, it will snap. So now it's perfectly on that red line. Alternatively, you can press G and then Z, and so that's your move tool, and then you can straight into the Z axis. So then what we'll do to generate the wine glass shape, rather than extruding things up and down and scaling all that sort of stuff out, we're going to just do some quick loop cuts and see how quickly we can make this. So if we remember from before, we needed probably one for the top of the base, a couple for the stem, and then sort of 3 or 4 more cuts for the shaping of the bowl part of the glass. So roughly 8 loop cuts will probably do us just fine. So Control R, and then just scroll up. So you've got 1, then 2, now 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and left click to confirm that, and right click to cancel out of any transformations. So now we can just Alt right click on any of these edges along here that are moving sideways, and that will select that edge. So if I Alt right click here, selected that edge. If you Alt right click on one of the edges going up and down, you will select possibly even the reverse edge loop along there. But I want to just shape the glass by selecting the edges that we've just cut in. So I will move this down, scale it in a little bit, and then select this one, move it down, scale it in a lot, select this one, maybe this one, scale that in a lot as well, and then scale that one in. So we've got a bit of shape to the stem. Select this one, move it down, scale it in, and just shape things how you want. You can aim for a champagne flute if you like instead of a wine glass, or any other sort of cylindrical cup. Be just fine. So we've got a fairly nice rounded looking bowl there. We will need to do a little bit of work on the top and bottom again, just because we didn't fill in the caps, because the ones that they give you aren't too great. But it's fairly easy work, and it's helpful to know how to create some faces. So what we'll do is sort of pick an angle where you can see the whole of this circle, so that's the bottom of the edges, and I'm just going to right click to select these 4 vertices. So I'll just rotate my view so you can see a bit better which ones I'm choosing, and then I'm going to press F on my keyboard, and that will create a face between those 4 vertices. If there was not an edge there, then it will create one for us, and we can just do that again here, and again here, and again here. And then if you see here, we've got 5 vertices, and we want to keep our faces generally to quads. When you add the subdivision surface modifier, the quads smooth out a lot nicer than any other number, because it's a nice round number, and the way it's designed is to work with quads. So what we will do to make it so that we can do quads here, we'll do a Control R to create another loop cut in here, left click and then right click to cancel that transformation, and then we can do 1, 2, 3, 4, hit F, 1, 2, 3, 4, hit F. If at any point when you're doing this you make a mistake, you can just press Control Z, and that will undo your steps as you did them. You can see how it undoes the selecting as well as the creation of those faces, which is nice and handy, because you might accidentally, like I've just done, select the wrong vertice, and it's created this weird face that doesn't fit in anywhere, and you're trying to figure out what's gone wrong. You can just press Control Z until you're back to somewhere where you're comfortable, and then just shift right click to do all of this. There we go. So that's filled in. And we'll do exactly the same on the top. If you do select 2 vertices, and you can just create an edge between them if you need to just create an edge. If you select 3, you create a triangle like I just did there. And basically when you're, if you accidentally create, say, a 5-sided polygon, what that will actually sort of be read as is a quad and a tri, and the triangle part of it will not deform very well. So now we've selected, we've capped in the top of the wine glass and the bottom with some simple polygon filling techniques. What we'll do is we will press Control Tab, or alternatively down here we can change to face edit mode. I usually do Control Tab because it's a lot quicker. And then again, Shift right click, just roughly where those black squares are. Blender's quite forgiving with its selection process. If you sort of right click generally anywhere on the face, it should select it. If you right click near a face, you might get it, and then eventually you get it there. We will, so with just this top section selected, or E to extrude, right click to cancel that, and then S to scale down. So this is just like the top of the last one now. We'll go into the front view, press Z to go to wireframe, E to extrude down, left click, S to scale up, E to extrude, left click, S to scale up, E to extrude, left click, S, E, left click, S, left click. So now we've got the inner wall of the glass created, and again, because we know it's probably going to have the same sort of effect because it's a fairly similarly designed glass, we'll just add another edge loop in the top middle there and just right click to cancel that transform again. So now we've got a wine glass. We'll change into object mode, change the shading again to smooth. Now this one's gone a little bit weird. I will just see if we can fix that. No, that's not fixing it. We'll just see what happens when we add the subdivision surface modifier. Now that doesn't look too bad, but it does look a little bit wonky. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, that's probably because of the faces on the bottom of it. So what we'll do to fix that, we'll select these faces. We'll E to extrude, right click, scale quite low down, and that just sort of makes them have less of an effect on the general shape of things. And we will actually create an edge loop along here. Make sure you get that one to create that sharp bottom. Maybe another one there, another one there. Just sharpen things out a bit. That's a lot better. So you can see things get a little bit weird in the middle of there, but we're not really going to see that, so that's not a problem. What we'll do now is add the same material as before. To do that, with the wine glass selected, we go to the materials panel here, and we can browse already created materials by clicking this drop down here, and we'll just choose the one that we created earlier. So that's got the same glass material on it. So now we can move this onto the other layer with the other wine glass and the lighting setup and everything. So we press M with the wine glass selected, it will let us move to layer. We'll just left click here, and that's moved the wine glass to the other layer. So we'll left click over here, and they're now sitting on top of each other. So we'll left click and drag and move that one out. So now we've got 2 wine glasses. What we can do is press 0 on the numpad to go to the camera view and hit Shift Z to get an idea of what our 2 wine glasses are looking like sitting together. We can move this a little bit, maybe. No, it's not letting me do that. So we just want to move this wine glass probably towards the center. And we'll move it G and then Y just to move it back a little bit, just to make the scene look a little bit more interesting. So now we've got 2 wine glasses there, looking okay. And the last way we will model our 3rd wine glass is by designing an outline and spinning that around in 3D to create a 3-dimensional object. It's a fairly easy process to do, and you can alter some of the parameters to create some interesting looking things if you want to. So again, we'll go to our 2nd layer, Shift Z to turn off that rendering. And what we will do is we will add we could add a curve, but they can be weird to work with, so we'll stick with polygons and vertices and edges. So we'll add in a plane, making sure our cursor is in the center with Shift C. Tab into edit mode, and make sure we're in vertice mode. And then with everything selected, press A a couple of times to make sure it's all selected. Do Alt M to merge everything at the center. So now what I've got is a single vertice, which you can't zoom in on because they stay the same size in the viewport. But you can, if you can't see the vertice, then you can probably see the arrows moving around. And that's just me moving my vertice. So I'll just Control Z to move that back to the center. And what we can do is go to the front view and start designing what we think the outline of our glass should look like. What I think I'll do now is I'll model a pint glass, so something that you drink your beer out of. It's a fairly simple shape, I think, so we'll see what we can do with that. So we'll start by just hitting an E with that vertex selected, and that will extrude the vertex and create an edge. I'm going to right click and then just move it along the x-axis here to create a very straight line. I'm going to press E and I will bring it straight up in the Z as well, so I can sort of get an idea of how tall I want the glass to be. That sort of looks roughly right. I want the top to obviously be a bit wider than the bottom. And then beer glasses tend to have a little bump on the outside near the top. Helps you hold the glass. So I will, using Control R, just to cut in an edge. What this won't let us do actually is it won't let us just slide where we want it to go because we don't have any polygons for it to slide along. But we'll cut twice there. So now we've got sort of the center of the top. And we'll start the little bump just up here. So we'll create another one. I'm just going to eyeball it just by pressing G and then moving down and keeping things fairly straight along there. Add in, say, 2 more edges there, or 2 more vertices, and then just bring them out a little bit. And then we'll probably want to create the wall of the glass as well. So we'll bring that straight across on the X, bring this down, and then E, and move it there. Now this central bit here is actually probably not dead on in the center because I just moved that by hand. So what I can do is press N to bring up the properties panel, and under transform we can actually see where everything is located. So we actually did manage to get dead on, but you can also, if you're a little bit out, you can just type 0 in these two, in the X and Y, to make sure that it's in the same spot as everything else. We'll also add another little one there just to create that little rounded edge at the top, and now we'll use a different modifier this time to spin things around. It's actually called a screw modifier. It's called a screw modifier because it does have a screw option here, which if you adjust it can help with making a screw type object. We're not going to be using that at all for this, So we'll just leave that at 0 and it creates us a nice cylinder. Also what it looks like I've created here is a bit of a plant pot. One of the first things we'll actually do here is click flip, because the normals were inverted. So we were actually looking at the back of the faces, but by clicking flip it just corrects that, and you can tell by the lighter grey colour versus the darker blue colour. You can also, change here steps and render steps. Probably want to keep those fairly similar, just so you sort of know what you're looking at. I will leave it at 16, and then we'll add a subsurface modifier later. If for some reason you didn't want a complete glass, you can change the angle there. It keeps the same amount of steps, but it doesn't complete the circle. I do want a complete circle, so we'll keep that at 360. And I don't think we need to worry about any of the rest of these. We'll actually merge vertices, and this will just merge things where in the very center where it's spun around, it's actually created 16 duplicates of that initial vertice. We don't want to keep those 16 duplicates because they're not doing anything for us. So we can just merge them away with just a setting there. Now what we will do is we will edit this outline just to create something a bit closer to what we wanted. And you'll see that it will actually dynamically update the glass or the actual 3D model as we go, which is quite nice. That looks roughly okay. Maybe it should be a little bit wider, a little bit rounder. Sort of hard to say exactly, but I think I'll just leave it like that for now without getting too much into details. We'll add another modifier, so we want to add that subdivision surface. Knock it up a couple of buttons there, and we'll see things have gone a bit weird at the top and bottom, and that's what happens when you use triangles with a subdivision surface modifier. You get this real weirdness coming in, but what we will do is add in some vertices down here, I think. We'll undo that, and what we can actually do is apply the screw modifier. So when we apply it, we won't be able to edit using this outline anymore, but I think it's sort of served its purpose for us for now. So we'll click apply, make sure we're not in edit mode to apply a modifier, tab back into edit mode, and you'll see it's just the same outline that's been spun around. It's all now an actual model. So if we Control R and then move this all the way down, that's sort of helped. We've reinforced that edge, and now all those triangles don't have to deform over a corner, so it looks okay. And we'll do the same for the inside of the glass. It can be a bit tricky because we are sort of looking at it through a wireframe. But you just sort of see, if you move your mouse cursor around, you'll see this looks like the outside to me, because you can see along the bottom of the screen, sort of along this area, you can see how it's actually the purple line where it shows you where the cut's going to go is along the outside of the glass. So I'll just move my mouse cursor until I see something that looks inside. I think that's about right. Drag that down all the way to the bottom, and we've sorted out the inside of the glass as well, so now it looks quite good. Once again, we will change the material, make sure the object is selected, and just change it to that glass material, and then press M and move to the same layer as the rest. Now this one's turned out a bit smaller than the others. I recommend that you scale in edit mode, because it can affect other things further down the line if the scales aren't all set to 1 in object mode. So it's a good habit to get into from the start, to just tab, and then to keep the bottom of the glass at the bottom of the world with the 3D cursor in the center of the world like this. What we can actually do is change our pivot point to the 3D cursor, and then select the whole glass in edit mode, press S to scale. You see it scales around the pivot point the 3D cursor as if the 3D cursor was the center of the glass instead of the center of mass being the center of the glass, which is a helpful little trick. We'll change this back to medium point, and then we'll move the glass in the 3D viewport in object mode. So now when we go to the camera and we hit Shift Z, so this is just our render preview for the viewport. It gives us an idea of how things are going to look for the final render, but it won't actually show us the fine details. So what we will do is actually move to that final render process. To do that, we'll click over here. This is the render settings tab. Make sure that you're rendering with GPU compute if you've got that available. And we will leave the resolution preset quite low. I'll just turn off the rendering there whilst we're working. We won't worry about output, but we will go to sampling for now. So here we've got preview. This is what it renders to in the viewport. So it only renders up to 32 samples versus 128 in a final render. These are just what we want to worry about for now. So when we press F12, or if we click on render here, it will render using the final render settings. So if we do that now, click render. I've got a fairly recent GPU, so my graphics card. So it renders probably in about 30 seconds to a minute for me, I think. We'll just let that render through. You can see as it's working, you know, the parts of the render show up. This is rendering at 100% scale, so the resolution settings here 1920 by 1080, but at 50%, so it's actually a quarter of the size because the dimensions are 50% in two directions. So now we've got this render here. You can see it's still quite grainy, but the nice glass material sort of showing through. We can scroll in by just zooming in with our mouse, or scroll back out. If you sort of forget where you've scrolled to, just hit 1 on your numpad to go back to 100%. And what we'll do is we'll compare a couple of renders. So down here we've got where it says slot 1. So slot 1 is the render slot that we've just used. What we'll do is we'll go to slot 2 and then change some settings. We will double the render samples, so from 128 to 256. So hopefully that will give us less graininess and a slightly crisper looking picture. So now that we're making sure we're in slot 2, I'm just going to hit F12, which is to render a still image. You can see it's taking a little bit longer this time. After about 10 seconds, I think, in the first render, it had already moved on to the second glass. We're now 15 seconds in, and we're just finishing up the first glass. So it's sort of taking, you know, about 1.5 times extra time to render the extra samples. But you see there's still a decent amount of graininess to it. But it's also cleaned up some of it. So the graininess isn't as thick and as big and as chunky. What we can do is keep increasing those render samples into the thousands, but that might, you know, create render times of, you know, several hours to several days to even weeks, just to create a simple image, which is obviously not ideal. So what we can do is there's been a recent tool added to Blender where we can actually blur the graininess out of it, which is quite nice because it does it at render time, so you don't have to do it in Photoshop or anything. So what we'll do is we can actually go here and just to compare the first two. So there's the first image in slot 1, so you can see how the difference in color between the graininess and how the graininess is more. If we zoom in a little bit, it's more further up the glass as well, even though it should be quite smooth there. And then we go to slot 2, and you can see how that's, you know, reduced. It smoothed things out a bit. and the difference in colour isn't as great, but it's still, you know, a fairly decent amount of graininess across the whole image. So we'll go to slot 3. Make sure we press 1 to go to 100% zoom. And then I believe in the scene tab, we scroll all the way down. Not in the scene tab, in the render layers tab. Here we go. So there's a denoising setting here. We'll just click there to tick it. There are some settings in here. We're not going to play with any of those for now. We're just going to tick on denoising and hit render. And what you will see happen is it will do the same rendering process as before, but the rendering square will jump over bits that have already been rendered, and that's the denoising process. So it's a bit more sophisticated than just a straight blur. It, you know, calculates what the noise is looking like and a smooth way to generate the image without distorting it too much. Obviously, the grainier the image that you start with, the more the denoising is going to have a change on the look of your image. So, you know, you might get up to a couple of thousand samples where the render times aren't too long, but you're still getting a bit of graininess. So that's when the denoising can be really, really effective. But even in a simple scene like the one that we've got, where we've only got 256 samples. Hopefully you can see by now that some of the areas that were really grainy, especially in the shadows just down here, see that's been completely denoised out, completely blurred out. And it's created a nice crisp looking final image. So just finishing that off now, and then we will play with the image a little bit. Alright, so now we're in slot 3. And as we zoom in, you'll see that all the little bits of graininess that were up and down the side of the glass, that's completely gone. Still a tiny little bit around the edge of the glass here. So that tells us maybe we need more samples. But in general, I mean, right now I'm zoomed in a fairly decent amount, so it's hard to complain that an image looks a bit pixely when you're zoomed right in. But when we zoom out and go to 100%, just by hitting 1, you see a fairly clean looking image. And that's, you know, quite a nice way to get something that looks pretty decent quite quickly. So I think we'll just have a quick look just to compare. So this slot 2, so this is the same image just without that denoising applied. And then again, go to slot 3 and you can see that it has done quite a significant amount of damage to that, the graininess, which is very nice. But that's where we will end the tutorial. If you want to save your image, we'll just click image and then save as image, and you can choose a directory anywhere you like and just type in and click save. It's very easy to do. But hopefully I've shown you that Blender is not a terrifying beast as you might think it is. What I would encourage you to do for your homework is to play with some of the buttons along here, see what they do. Hover your mouse over something, it will show you the shortcuts and it will show you the name of the tool. Where it says Python on there, don't worry too much about that. I think that's for the people that are programmers to make use of. But for the rest of us, I encourage you to play with Blender. You know, it's not a scary tool. And when you are playing with Blender, if you want to find a tool that you're aware of, maybe you've worked in a different 3D program before, it's a very easy way to access tools that you might not know where to find the button for. Just press the space bar, brings up this search box. It's a dynamic search box, so say I want you to know how to bridge edge loops. I'll just type bridge, if I could spell bridge. I think that one's a edit mode one, so we'll go into edit mode, space, Bridge, there we go. So, bridge edge loops. That's a tool I use quite frequently, and I typically just press space and type bridge, and that gets me where I need to go. If you've got any further questions, I suppose the best thing to do is type it up in the comments. Don't be afraid to ask. Go to the subreddits for Blender, r/Blender, and make use of Google. There's various forums around. Yeah, just ask questions and don't be afraid. So if you've liked this video, try and give it a like. Maybe subscribe to my channel, but you do what you want to do. Have a good day and take care.